It happened on what should have been just a regular Tuesday afternoon. Nothing special, nothing dramatic. But within moments, an ordinary grocery store became the center of a viral moment that has since shaken millions to their core. Imagine you're standing in line, scanning the shelves for your favorite snacks, when suddenly, raised voices cut through the hum of casual conversation. A grown man, red-faced and visibly agitated, is yelling at a young boy. But not just any boy. This child, no older than 8, stands silently, his eyes wide with confusion, his body frozen in place. That's when everything changes. Because the next words don't come from the boy, but from his mom. And what she says turns the entire crowd from silent onlookers into something else entirely. And what she does next, it doesn't just stop the shouting. It sparks something that has people talking, sharing, and cheering around the world. You're about to find out why. But before we dive into this unforgettable moment, let me ask you something personal. Have you ever witnessed a situation so uncomfortable, so shocking, that you didn't know whether to speak up or stay quiet? Maybe it was a stranger being unfairly judged. Maybe it was a child being misunderstood. Or maybe, deep down, you were left wondering if you'd have had the courage to act differently. That's what this story taps into. The quiet battles that happen in plain sight, the invisible struggles that many of us walk past every day without noticing. But today, you won't walk past it. Today, you're stepping right into the middle of it. And trust me, by the end of this story, you're going to see that little boy and his mother in a whole new light. So if you've ever felt the sting of injustice, if you've ever needed a reminder of what true strength looks like, or if you're just curious what one woman could possibly say that had an entire crowd clapping, you're exactly where you need to be. Now, I know how easy it is to click away. With endless videos promising shocking twists and heart-stopping moments, it can all start to sound the same. But this one? This is real. This is about a mother whose love was louder than ignorance. This is about a boy whose silence spoke volumes. And this is about you, because I'm not just here to tell a story. I'm here to invite you into it. Because what happens next says a lot about how we treat each other when nobody thinks we're watching. That's what makes this more than just a headline. This is a wake-up call, a gut check, a moment where everything you thought you knew about kindness, about patience, about parenting, gets turned on its head. So stay with me, because the answer you came looking for, the reason this story has captured hearts across the country, is coming. You're going to hear the exact words this mother said that stopped everyone cold. You're going to see how a simple trip to the store turned into a lesson on humanity that none of us can afford to forget. And yes, you're going to understand why that crowd erupted. Not with anger, but with thunderous applause. It's all here, every beat of it. And if you care about doing what's right, even when it's hard, then you already know you can't look away now. The story begins in a mid-sized town just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, a place where neighbors nod politely at each other and parents juggle busy schedules between soccer practice and work. This wasn't a place known for viral drama. But as we all know, sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from the most unexpected places. And that day, one mom, tired, overworked, and just trying to pick up a few things, walked into that store with her son, who was having a tough day. Not because he was being difficult, but because he was doing his best to process the overwhelming noise, lights, and motion that most of us barely even notice. His name is Ethan, and Ethan has autism. Now, if you've ever known someone with autism, or you're a parent yourself, you know it's not always easy. It's not something you can see. It's not written on their face. But it affects how they experience the world. Loud sounds can be painful, unexpected changes can feel like chaos, and social cues that come naturally to most can be baffling. Ethan's mom, Rachel, knew all of this. She had lived every moment of his young life, helping him find comfort, safety, and dignity in a world that often doesn't make room for kids like him. But that day, in that aisle, someone didn't just ignore Ethan's struggle. He lashed out at it. A man, mid-50s, sharply dressed, the kind who walks with the confidence of someone used to being listened to, grew irritated by Ethan's behavior. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't breaking anything. He was just humming, rocking back and forth slightly, focused on the toy in his hands. A coping strategy. But for this man, It was annoying. He demanded the boy act normal, that Rachel control her kid, and he did so loudly, harshly, and without a shred of compassion. Others heard. Some stared. Some looked away. But no one said anything until Rachel stepped forward. And what she said next. Let's just say it was the kind of moment people wish they'd recorded, but didn't have to. Because what happened burned itself into the memory of every single person who was there. And yes, in a world where people often look the other way, Rachel didn't just speak up. She lit the room on fire with the truth. But hold that thought, because before we reveal her powerful response, I want you to sit with the weight of that moment. Think about what it must feel like as a parent to have your child treated like a nuisance by a stranger. Think about the restraint it takes not to lash out, not to scream back, but to stand tall, speak wisely, and still teach something unforgettable. This story isn't just about autism. It's about how we respond to what we don't understand. It's about the pressure moms face every single day just trying to protect their children from judgment. It's about the people who say, "He doesn't look disabled," and the damage those words can do. And most of all, it's about the crowd, the people watching. Because you might wonder, why didn't anyone intervene sooner? Why didn't someone stop the man before it got ugly? And the answer is uncomfortable. Because sometimes people wait. They wait to see what others will do. They wait to avoid being the first to speak up. But Rachel didn't wait. And neither did her son. You see, what happened next is what transforms this from a sad scene to an unforgettable message. When Rachel finally responded, when she took a deep breath and stepped toward the man, what came out of her mouth wasn't angry or defensive. It wasn't rude or reactive. It was something else entirely. Something that made even the harshest critics pause. And that's where we're headed next. So don't move. Because in just a second, we'll walk through exactly what she said and why it led to a wave of clapping, tears, and even one store manager offering her flowers on the spot. But for now, I want you to hold onto one truth. Sometimes, it only takes one voice to change everything. And in that store, that day, Rachel's voice became the one that reminded an entire community what empathy really looks like. So stay right where you are. Because the moment that turned everything around, that moment's coming up next. And trust me, you're going to want to hear every word. Rachel Thompson hadn't always been the type of woman who could silence a room with her words. In fact, not long ago, she might have been the kind who shrinks away from confrontation altogether. She wasn't a social media influencer. She wasn't a trained speaker or public figure. She was, in every possible way, an ordinary American mom, someone who split her time between late-night laundry, packing school lunches, keeping up with special education appointments, and somehow scraping together enough energy to smile through it all. But life has a way of shaping us through pressure, and for Rachel, every appointment with a dismissive therapist, every sideways glance in a public setting, and every well-meaning but clueless comment from strangers had sharpened something inside her. It wasn't anger, it was purpose. And on that day in the store, when her son was unfairly targeted for simply being himself, all that quiet strength finally had a reason to speak. To understand how she got to that point, you have to know what the week had been like. It hadn't started with conflict. In fact, just a few days earlier, Rachel and Ethan had gone to a nearby sensory-friendly movie screening, a rare treat that Rachel had worked hard to schedule around her chaotic life. It was supposed to be a simple joy, but even that had its challenges. Ethan had gotten overwhelmed midway through, and a couple behind them made not-so-quiet remarks about kids these days needing special treatment. Rachel had brushed it off, smiling politely, but that moment stuck with her. Then, just days later, Ethan's teacher called to report a meltdown triggered by a sudden schedule change at school. Rachel had spent the evening on the phone advocating for additional support in Ethan's individualized education program, trying to get people who barely knew her son to understand that these weren't behavioral issues. They were neurological responses to a world that often moves too fast and too loud. By the time she stepped into that grocery store, her emotional reserve was paper-thin, though you wouldn't know it to look at her. She was still kind, still patient. But under the surface, a storm had been brewing. The man who yelled at Ethan didn't know any of this. He didn't see the appointments, the tears, the paperwork, or the nights Rachel spent researching new therapy techniques by the glow of her phone. All he saw was a child acting differently, and like so many who've never had to understand neurodiversity, he assumed that difference meant disorder. That disorder meant disruption. And that disruption needed to be corrected, by force if necessary. But here's where things get more complicated. Because that man, whose name, by the way, is Richard Langston, isn't just some impatient shopper with a short fuse. He's a retired principal. A man who once ran an elementary school not far from where Rachel now lives. He's someone who spent decades in education, someone who built his career on shaping young minds. So, how does someone like that become so blind to what's right in front of him? That's where the cracks in this story begin to show. Some of the witnesses at the store said they'd seen Richard before. One cashier said he comes in every Thursday around the same time, always dressed neatly, always in a rush, and always muttering to himself about how things used to be. Others described him as polite but curt. One woman even claimed he'd snapped at a mother before, something about her toddler touching cereal boxes. At first, these might seem like harmless details. But taken together, they start painting a picture of someone who's not just impatient, but possibly bitter. And the more you dig, the more it seems like Richard may have been carrying something heavier than just irritation that day. Maybe this wasn't about Ethan at all. Maybe this was about Richard's past, about regrets, losses, or even a hidden history with children who needed support he never quite knew how to give. Meanwhile, Rachel wasn't new to being watched. Ever since Ethan's diagnosis at age 3, she'd learned how people reacted to him. Sometimes they were warm, curious, and kind. Other times, they were judgmental, cold, or even afraid. But no reaction ever surprised her anymore. What did surprise her, though, was how quiet the other shoppers were at first. The crowd that would later cheer had initially just stood there, silent, frozen, unsure. Some gripped their carts tightly, unsure of what they were witnessing. Others kept their eyes low, hoping to avoid becoming part of whatever confrontation was brewing. But there were a few, just a few, who looked back and forth between Rachel and Richard like they were weighing sides. That's important. Because in moments like these, people often don't just witness injustice, they calculate it. They try to figure out who's right, who's wrong, and what their own comfort level is with stepping into the fray. And then there was the security footage. Though it hasn't been released publicly, a few employees later confirmed that management reviewed the tapes after the incident, partly to protect themselves legally, but also because they couldn't believe what they'd heard. Some say there's a segment of the video where Richard appears to clench his fists just before raising his voice. Others say you can see Rachel's shoulders stiffen before she even turns to face him. It's almost as if she knew what was coming before it happened.
But why?
Could it be that she'd had a previous run-in with him? Had their paths crossed before, perhaps at a school board meeting, a community event, or even during one of Ethan's therapy sessions? That brings us to another curious piece of the puzzle, Rachel's recent search history. According to a friend close to her, she had been researching former educators in the area, specifically those with backgrounds in special education policy. She had also made several inquiries into former school staff who had been accused of discriminatory behavior. Was this just a coincidence? Was she working on something bigger, maybe a formal complaint, a personal blog, or even a local advocacy campaign? Or was she trying to track down someone from her past who had impacted Ethan's early education in a negative way? The threads begin to tangle here, and not everything lines up neatly. Some think Richard's outburst was random. Others believe it was the culmination of a long-standing, silent feud that neither party ever fully acknowledged, until it all came spilling out in that fluorescent-lit aisle. The community itself has begun to pick sides. Social media posts cropped up days after the incident, with hashtags like #ProtectEthan, #NeurodivergentRights, and #CheerForRachel trending across platforms. Local radio shows debated whether Rachel's response was brave or just well-timed. One podcast even speculated that the entire event might have been staged to raise awareness, though that theory quickly lost steam when multiple first-hand accounts confirmed the raw emotion and unrehearsed tension in the room. Still, the fact that anyone would suggest staging points to something deeper, a cultural mistrust in what we see and what we believe. And in this age of viral stories and edited clips, that mistrust adds another layer of fog to an already confusing encounter. As more people weigh in, new details continue to emerge, each one adding more questions than answers. One witness claimed they saw Richard speaking to a store employee right before the confrontation, gesturing toward Rachel and Ethan as if trying to make a complaint. Another claimed they overheard Rachel muttering, "Not again," under her breath, possibly suggesting this wasn't her first time being cornered like this. Yet none of these details provide clarity, only more speculation. What were Richard's true intentions that day? Was he simply overwhelmed and lashing out? Or was there a deeper resentment brewing within him, something tied to his past, his ego, or his fear of a changing world? All of this leads to a single moment, one that continues to haunt those who were there. It's the moment just before Rachel speaks. The air thick with tension. Ethan holding tightly to the toy in his hand. Richard's voice ringing through the aisle. And Rachel, her hand gently resting on her son's shoulder, her eyes locked on the man who dared to shame him. Whatever happened next, it was no accident. It was deliberate. It was powerful. And it was heard far beyond that store. But before we step into what Rachel said, there's still one more thing you need to know, something that might change how you see everyone involved. Because there was one more person in the store that day. Someone who wasn't part of the shouting. Someone who watched quietly, then left before the crowd reacted. And what they saw, well, let's just say it may explain why, days later, a handwritten letter arrived at Rachel's door, and signed, unmarked, and containing just 8 words. "You did what I never could. Thank you." The letter changed everything. At first, Rachel wasn't even sure what to make of it. She turned it over in her hands a dozen times, looking for some kind of clue, a return address, a smudge of ink, even the indentation of a pen on the envelope. But there was nothing. Just 8 haunting words written in crisp black ink. No name, no explanation. "You did what I never could. Thank you." It was unsettling, not because it felt threatening, but because it felt too personal, like someone had seen far more than they should have. Rachel found herself thinking back to the moment right before she responded to Richard. She replayed the scene in her mind over and over again, trying to remember everyone who had been around her, every face in the crowd. But memory can be a tricky thing, especially when adrenaline is high. The more she tried to recall, the more details slipped through her grasp, as if the truth was intentionally hiding just out of reach. Determined to get answers, Rachel went back to the grocery store the next day. She asked to speak to the manager and explained that she was looking for the store's security footage, mentioning the confrontation and how it had affected her son. The manager, a young man named Derek, seemed cooperative at first. He nodded sympathetically and said the footage was available, but only for a short time before it was automatically deleted from their system. Rachel's heart pounded. This might be her only shot to see the full picture. But just as quickly as he offered hope, Derek's tone shifted. He glanced toward the back of the store, then lowered his voice and told her the footage was no longer retrievable. When Rachel pressed him, he became vague. "Corporate policy," he said. "Someone higher up already reviewed it. They pulled it before I could make a copy." It didn't make sense. Why would anyone want to bury a simple recording unless there was something in it worth hiding? Later that afternoon, Rachel received a phone call from someone who claimed to be a representative of the store's parent company. The woman on the line sounded polite but firm. She said that while the company empathized with Rachel's experience, they strongly discouraged any further inquiry into internal records. It was framed as a legal precaution, something to avoid bad press or potential liability. But Rachel could hear the subtext clearly. Stop asking questions. It was enough to make her wonder if the letter and the missing footage were connected. Could someone in the store have known what was about to happen before it did? Could this all be part of something bigger? The warning didn't stop her. It only pushed her deeper. That night, she logged back into a private Facebook group for parents of children with autism. It was a tight-knit community, full of shared stories, support, and whispered warnings about unfriendly public spaces. She described the incident and the strange letter, hoping someone might recognize the handwriting or know someone who had been at the store. A few parents responded with support, Some even shared similar experiences of being shamed in public. But then one message stood out. It came from a profile with no photo and barely any posts. The message simply read, "Be careful who you trust. Not everyone cheering was on your side." Attached was a blurry image, a screen grab from what looked like a phone camera. It showed the crowd in the background during the confrontation. And there, just behind a display of canned goods, stood a woman holding her phone high, clearly recording, but she never appeared in any of the viral clips that later circulated online. Rachel didn't recognize her. She wasn't a local parent. She wasn't a store employee. And most oddly of all, she wasn't reacting to the chaos around her. She was watching Rachel. Suddenly, the cheering crowd didn't feel so warm anymore. What if someone there hadn't been clapping out of support, but documenting the entire scene for a different reason? Rachel dug deeper. She began asking around about Richard Langston's past, hoping to better understand what might have driven him to act the way he did. What she discovered shocked her. Years ago, during his time as principal, there had been a quiet internal investigation into complaints of verbal abuse toward students with disabilities. The investigation went nowhere. Most of the witnesses had remained anonymous, and no formal charges were ever filed. But one thing stood out: a student named Caleb who had reportedly transferred out suddenly, without warning, after his mother filed a complaint. The paperwork was buried, but the rumor in the district was that the case had been quietly resolved to avoid a public scandal. Rachel searched for any trace of Caleb or his family, but kept hitting dead ends. No social media, no local school records, nothing. It was like they had vanished. She wondered, for the first time, if the letters she received might have come from someone connected to that case. Someone who had watched, helpless back then, and saw in Rachel the courage they once lacked. But just as she was about to message a former school staff member she found on LinkedIn who might have known Richard, her internet cut out, along with the power in her house. At first, she assumed it was a coincidence. A late-night storm, maybe. But when she stepped outside to check, the rest of the block still had lights. It was just her home. A creeping sense of unease settled over her. Was someone trying to scare her into backing off? Or was she just letting the tension get to her? The next morning, Rachel went to her car to drive Ethan to school, only to find her front tire slashed. No note. No broken glass. Nothing stolen. Just one clean, deliberate cut across the rubber. She didn't call the police. Not yet. She didn't want to look paranoid. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. Someone didn't want her asking questions. Someone was watching. Maybe they had been since the moment in the store. Maybe even before. And then, just when Rachel was beginning to doubt her instincts, she received another message, this time slid under her front door. A single sheet of paper, folded once. No envelope. No signature. It read, "Digging too deep has consequences. For your son's sake, stop." The letter was typed. And this time, the threat was crystal clear. Rachel stood frozen, staring at the typed letter in her hands. The threat was unmistakable, and it sent a wave of dread through her chest. It wasn't just a vague warning. It was a clear ultimatum. Whoever had sent it knew everything about her, about Ethan, about her growing investigation into Richard Langston, and the hidden past that seemed to have followed them both into that grocery store. But what was more unsettling was the sudden realization that this was no longer just her fight. She was no longer the only one being targeted. As she paced the small living room, her mind racing through the recent events, she remembered a conversation from earlier that week. She'd been speaking to her best friend, Sarah, a woman who had been one of the first to offer support when Rachel had first shared her experience with the public. Sarah had offered moral support, along with a promise to help however she could. But now Rachel couldn't shake the memory of Sarah's recent behavior. Her odd pauses during their last conversation, her reluctance to meet in person, and the way she'd been strangely dismissive when Rachel mentioned looking into Richard's past. Rachel had written it off as stress at the time, but now that the letter had arrived, something about Sarah's actions seemed different. Maybe Sarah knew more than she was letting on. The thought gnawed at Rachel, so the next day, she decided to call Sarah. It was a Saturday, and she knew Sarah had plans to visit her sister in a nearby town, but when Rachel tried her cell phone, It went straight to voicemail. That was unusual. Sarah always answered, even if it was just to say she was busy. Rachel tried texting, but there was no response. Hours passed and still nothing. The anxiety in her chest grew heavier. She needed answers, and Sarah was the one person who had been with her through all of this. But when she finally received a message from Sarah later that afternoon, it wasn't what she expected. "I need some space right now. I hope you understand. I'll reach out when I'm ready." The message was brief and oddly formal. Something wasn't adding up. Was Sarah truly just taking a break, or was she pulling away for another reason altogether? Rachel's thoughts spiraled. Could Sarah have received one of those letters too? Could someone be warning her to stay away from the investigation? Or was Sarah somehow involved in a deeper way, perhaps even connected to the mystery that had started with Richard Langston? Rachel's doubts multiplied as she realized there was another thread she hadn't pulled on yet. Ethan had been attending therapy regularly, and during their last session, his therapist had mentioned something that caught Rachel off guard. Dr. Caldwell, a calm and measured man who had worked with Ethan for years, had seemed unusually distant during their last meeting. It was subtle, his tone was off, and his usual attention to detail seemed to slip. When Rachel had asked him what he thought of her efforts to uncover the truth about Richard's history and education, he hesitated. At first, he said he couldn't comment on matters that didn't directly involve his practice. But then, as Rachel pressed him, his demeanor shifted. He glanced at the door, then leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Rachel," he said quietly, "there are things in this world you don't want to know. Some battles are better left alone. Trust me on this." It was a cryptic warning, the kind of thing that could easily be dismissed as a well-meaning suggestion from a professional, but Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. Was Dr. Caldwell trying to protect her, or was he hiding something? What was it about Richard's past that made him so reluctant to even speak about it? Was there a secret he was keeping from her, something darker than he was willing to admit? As Rachel reflected on the past few days, her head spun with all the conflicting pieces. Each new layer of the mystery only seemed to deepen the web she was caught in. The missing footage, the warning letter, Sarah's strange behavior, Dr. Caldwell's cryptic advice. And Richard. What was his true connection to all of this? Could there be more to him than just a disgruntled, frustrated man taking his anger out on a child? It didn't seem to add up. But if it wasn't him, then who? Rachel knew that if she wanted to get to the bottom of this, she'd have to trust her instincts. And those instincts were telling her that someone was lying, someone close to her. The tension continued to build when, just a day later, Rachel received another unexpected message. This time, it wasn't a letter. It was a video, an encrypted file that came through a secure messaging app. At first, Rachel didn't recognize the number that had sent it. It was a private, untraceable account. Her pulse quickened as she clicked the link, and the screen flashed to life. The video was short, less than a minute long, but it was enough to leave her breathless. The footage was grainy and shaky, but Rachel could make out the familiar surroundings of the grocery store. The camera panned across the aisles, moving toward the place where the confrontation had taken place. And then, Rachel's heart nearly stopped. In the video, she saw herself. She saw the exact moment she had turned to face Richard, her expression fierce, but what happened next made Rachel's stomach drop. There, standing just behind Richard, was someone she recognized, a face she thought she'd forgotten. It was Sarah. But she wasn't cheering with the crowd. She wasn't even looking at the scene. Instead, she was walking quickly, almost deliberately, toward the exit, her phone held low in front of her. Was she recording? Was she somehow involved in capturing this moment for reasons Rachel couldn't yet understand? The video ended abruptly, and a new message appeared on the screen. "You're not the only one with secrets." Rachel's hands trembled as she sat there, staring at the dark screen. Could Sarah really have been involved in something more sinister? Was she working with someone else to manipulate the situation? Or had she been another pawn in a game she hadn't understood? And what about Dr. Caldwell? Was he trying to cover his tracks as well? Or had he been telling Rachel the truth all along when he warned her to stop digging? The twists were becoming too much to ignore. It wasn't just about Richard anymore. It wasn't just about Ethan and the moment in the store. It was about something much larger, something that seemed to reach into Rachel's life in ways she hadn't imagined. Who could she trust? Who was playing games, and who was trying to protect her? As the stakes got higher, Rachel found herself trapped in a maze of lies, secrets, and threats, with no clear way out. All she knew for sure was this: the deeper she went, the more dangerous it became. But she wasn't about to back down. The truth, no matter how dark, was something she had to uncover. But who was really pulling the strings behind the scenes? And would Rachel be able to find out before it was too late? Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. It started as a faint, almost imperceptible sensation, a nagging itch at the back of her mind that would flare up when she least expected it. She'd feel eyes on her when she walked down the street, when she passed familiar faces at the grocery store, even when she sat in her car in the driveway. But now, it wasn't just a feeling. It was real. The creeping unease that had started as a faint whisper had grown louder, more demanding, until it was a constant pressure in her chest. She couldn't ignore it anymore. The messages, the video, the strange disappearances of key pieces of evidence, it all pointed to something far darker than she had imagined. And now, she had no choice but to confront it head-on. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when everything came crashing down. Ethan had been out with his tutor for a few hours, and Rachel had taken the time to sort through her thoughts. She was sitting in the kitchen, staring at her phone, trying to piece together the puzzle in her head, when she noticed something odd. A single car was parked across the street, just sitting there. At first, she dismissed it as nothing, a neighbor, maybe, or someone waiting for a friend. But as the minutes passed, the car didn't move. It was a dark sedan, nothing particularly unusual about it, but it was the way it lingered that sent a chill through Rachel's spine. She tried to focus on her work, tried to ignore the growing knot in her stomach, but the car stayed there, like a silent observer of her every move. Was it coincidence? Maybe. But deep down, Rachel knew it wasn't. Just as she began to think she was being paranoid, the car slowly pulled away, turning the corner at the end of the block. But that wasn't the moment that shook her. It was the next moment, when she glanced at her phone. A new message had appeared, a simple, almost innocent text. "You're not safe, Rachel. Don't trust anyone." Her heart raced as she stared at the screen, the blood draining from her face. The message wasn't from Sarah. It wasn't from anyone she recognized. It came from an anonymous number, one that had never contacted her before. The message was brief, but the weight of it was enough to send her into a spiral of dread. Her hands trembled as she typed back, trying to demand answers, but the message wouldn't send. Her phone froze, as if the device itself was refusing to cooperate. It felt like a warning, a sign that whatever was happening, it was escalating, and fast. Rachel tried to shake off the panic, but the growing sense of danger was impossible to ignore. She grabbed her keys and went outside, her breath catching as she scanned the street for any signs of movement. She didn't know what she was looking for, but everything felt wrong. Her house, her neighborhood, it all seemed suddenly unfamiliar, even hostile. She decided to head to the store, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy. But as she got into her car and pulled away from her driveway, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following her. It was subtle at first, just a car in her rearview mirror, keeping a steady distance. But as she made turns, the car stayed behind her, never too close but always there, like a shadow she couldn't escape. Rachel's pulse quickened. She couldn't tell if she was just being paranoid, but the longer the car followed her, the more certain she became that something was very wrong. She made a few erratic turns, hoping to lose whoever was tailing her, but the car never broke off. It followed her for miles, through the winding streets, through quiet neighborhoods. Rachel's hands gripped the steering wheel, her mind racing. Was this just a coincidence? Or was someone watching her every move? Her instinct screamed that this was no random pursuit. Whoever was behind her knew exactly what they were doing. Just as she was about to pull into a parking lot, the car behind her swerved violently and sped off, disappearing into the night. But Rachel didn't feel relief. She felt terror. The message, the car, the overwhelming sense that something was closing in on her. It was all part of the same twisted game. And now, she realized, she was the one being hunted. She drove back home, her mind reeling, but when she reached her street, she found her front door wide open. Her heart leapt into her throat. She had locked it before leaving. She was sure of it. The door swung open, creaking in the quiet evening air, as if inviting her into whatever lay ahead. She stepped cautiously inside, her heart pounding in her chest. Her house was eerily silent, and at first, everything seemed normal. The kitchen, the living room, the hallway, nothing appeared disturbed. But as she moved deeper into the house, she noticed something strange. On the floor, near the hallway, was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in half. Rachel's blood ran cold as she bent down to pick it up. The handwriting was unmistakable, sloppy, rushed, but familiar. Stop looking. The next one won't be as easy. It was a direct threat. The message was clear, and this time, there would be no mistaking it. Rachel wasn't just being watched. She was being hunted. But just as her mind tried to process the weight of what was happening, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke through her thoughts. Rachel's heart stopped. She wasn't expecting anyone. She rushed to the window and peered through the blinds, her stomach churning with dread. The dark sedan was parked in her driveway, the same car she had seen earlier. She stepped back from the window, her breath shallow. The air around her seemed to close in, suffocating her. She had no idea who was out there, who was behind this, or why they were doing this to her. But there was no denying the truth now. Whoever was pulling the strings had no intention of stopping. Rachel was in over her head, and she was dangerously close to finding out just how deep the rabbit hole went. The stakes had never been higher, and she realized, with a jolt of cold fear, that the only way out might be to confront the darkness head-on. But what if the truth was worse than she could ever imagine? Before she could make a move, the front doorbell rang. It was a sound that chilled her to the bone. Rachel stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest, as the doorbell rang again. The chime echoed through the house, piercing the silence with an eerie urgency. She didn't want to open it. She couldn't. Not with the message, not with the car still sitting in her driveway, and not with the overwhelming sense that everything she thought she knew was spiraling out of control. But who else could it be? The voice in her head told her to leave, to run, but her feet wouldn't move. Slowly, with dread pooling in her stomach, she walked toward the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob. When she opened it, she wasn't expecting what she saw. There, standing on her doorstep, was someone she'd never imagined would show up, Dr. Caldwell, the therapist she had trusted so deeply. The man who had been a quiet presence in her life, guiding her through Ethan's struggles and her own personal turmoil. He stood there, his face pale and his eyes shifting nervously, as if he were equally as afraid as she was. But that wasn't what shocked Rachel the most. What shook her to the core was the sight of the small envelope he was holding in his hand, one that looked all too familiar. "Rachel, we need to talk," Dr. Caldwell said, his voice tight with urgency. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by something darker, something Rachel couldn't place. His eyes darted behind him, as if to make sure they weren't being watched, before he stepped into the house without waiting for an invitation. "I didn't think it would come to this, but I need you to know the truth," he continued, shutting the door behind him with a soft click. His gaze lingered on the letter in his hand, and then he looked at Rachel with an expression she had never seen before: guilt, fear, and something else, something Rachel couldn't quite define. Rachel's pulse quickened. She tried to make sense of what was happening. "What are you talking about, Dr. Caldwell? Why are you here?" She could barely get the words out. Her mind was racing, her instincts screaming at her that something was terribly wrong. She had trusted him, relied on him, especially after the warning he had given her. But now, here he was, standing in her living room, holding an envelope that mirrored the one she had received earlier. Her throat tightened. Had he been involved in all of this? Was he the one orchestrating the games, pulling the strings from behind the scenes? He paused for a moment, clearly struggling with how to start. "The letter you received, it wasn't meant for you," It was meant for me. He exhaled sharply, his hands shaking slightly as he set the envelope down on the coffee table between them. And that's why I've been so cautious, so careful about what I've said to you. But now it's too late to back out. I've been trying to protect you, but I can't keep up the charade any longer. Rachel's head spun. She took a step back, her eyes flicking to the envelope. What do you mean it was meant for you?
Who sent it?
What is this about? She could feel the walls closing in around her, the weight of the unanswered questions pressing down on her chest. How could she have missed this? How could she have been so blind to the possibility that someone so close to her, someone she trusted, could be involved in something so sinister? Dr. Caldwell swallowed hard, his eyes filled with regret. I'm sorry, Rachel. I never wanted you to get dragged into this. I didn't want you to find out, but now you've come too far. I thought I could stop it, but it's beyond me now. The truth is, I've been watching you and your family. Ethan, too. I've been working with someone you wouldn't expect. And this whole thing, this investigation, it's not what you think. None of it is. It's all connected, Rachel. Everything you've been looking into, all of it, it's a setup. Rachel's stomach dropped. The words didn't make sense. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet as the truth seemed to warp and twist in ways she couldn't understand. What do you mean a setup?
Who are you working with?
What does this have to do with Richard? And Sarah? What about Sarah? Her voice was shaking now, her heart pounding. She couldn't process it. Dr. Caldwell had been the last person she'd ever suspected of being involved in this twisted game. I can't tell you everything, he said, his voice tight with tension. But I can tell you that you're in much deeper than you realize. The person you've been investigating, the one who's been tormenting you, sending you messages, it's not Richard. It's someone much closer to you, someone you've been trusting all along. His words hit like a punch to the gut, and Rachel's mind reeled, trying to make sense of the implications. I've been trying to keep you safe, but it's getting out of control. I don't know how much longer I can protect you from the truth. Rachel's head was spinning. Her mind raced with the possibilities. If it wasn't Richard Langston pulling the strings, if it wasn't the man she had initially believed was behind all of this, then who? Who could be so close to her, so embedded in her life, and yet hiding in the shadows, manipulating everything she had believed to be true? Dr. Caldwell reached for the envelope, his fingers trembling as he slid it across the table toward her. I shouldn't have brought you into this, Rachel, but it's too late now. You need to read this. You need to understand what you're up against. His eyes flicked nervously toward the window, and for the first time, Rachel noticed how the light in the room seemed to grow darker, how the shadows seemed to press in around them. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope, her breath catching in her throat as she pulled out a single sheet of paper. Her eyes scanned the message quickly, but when she reached the final line, her blood ran cold. The message was simple, direct. Your real enemy is closer than you think. Stop now, or we will take what matters most. Rachel's world tilted, and everything she thought she knew about her life, about her family, about her very reality, shattered in that moment. There was no way back. Whoever was behind this, whoever had been pulling the strings all along, was playing a game that Rachel had no way of understanding, no way of winning. The stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined, and the truth, if she ever managed to uncover it, was more dangerous than she could ever have prepared for. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the letter in her hands, her mind spinning with the horrifying realization that everything she had believed about her life was a lie. The words blurred before her eyes, the warning about her real enemy, echoing in her head like a haunting mantra. It was all too much. She had trusted the people closest to her, Dr. Caldwell, her family, her friends, and now she was being told that one of them might be the very person behind everything. The weight of that possibility felt suffocating. Could she really confront them? Could she bear to face someone she loved, someone she thought she knew, and accuse them of being a part of the nightmare that had consumed her life? She sat there, paralyzed by the letter, unable to move. Her mind was a storm of emotions. Fear, betrayal, confusion, but underneath it all was a growing sense of urgency. Whoever had written this letter was not playing games. They were dangerous, and they had a plan. A sickening plan that Rachel didn't fully understand yet, but she was certain it involved her and Ethan. She couldn't let them drag her son into this, no matter how twisted the situation had become. It was in that moment, as Rachel tried to gather her thoughts, that she heard the soft click of the front door opening. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the last thing she needed was for someone to walk in on her in the middle of this chaos. She quickly stuffed the letter into her pocket and stood, her pulse racing as she moved toward the hallway, hoping to remain unseen. But just as she reached the corner, she froze. Sarah stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with what looked like a mixture of guilt and fear. "Rachel, we need to talk," she said softly, her voice trembling. It wasn't the usual confident tone Sarah used when they spoke. There was something raw in her words, something that immediately set Rachel on edge. "Sarah, what's going on?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't want to ask, but she couldn't hold it in any longer. She had to know the truth. Was Sarah involved in all of this? Had she been lying to Rachel all along, feeding her false information, playing her like a pawn in this twisted game? Sarah looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to be listening. Then, without another word, she stepped forward, closed the door behind her, and locked it. Her actions were quick, deliberate, too deliberate. Rachel's stomach churned with anxiety. "I don't know who to trust anymore, Rachel," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I think you need to hear this." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope, the edges worn from being handled. When she handed it to Rachel, she didn't look her in the eye. Instead, Sarah stared at the floor, her fists clenched at her sides, her body tense with a mix of fear and guilt. Rachel hesitated, her hand hovering over the envelope. Was this another game? Another lie? Or was this the truth, the key to everything that had been happening? She tore open the envelope, the paper inside feeling like a weight in her hands. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the contents quickly. The message was short, almost chilling in its simplicity. "If you want your son to stay safe, stop digging. Leave town.
Now."
Rachel felt her blood run cold. Her fingers shook as she held the paper, unable to process what it meant. The words were a direct threat, a warning that felt too real to ignore. Whoever had sent this was no longer hiding in the shadows. They were getting bolder, and Rachel knew deep down that they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. But what did they want? And why now? What had she uncovered that was so dangerous? She looked up at Sarah, who was still standing by the door, her eyes filled with unspeakable sorrow. "What is this?" Rachel whispered. "Why are you involved in this? What's really going on, Sarah?" For a moment, there was silence, an unbearable tension hanging in the air between them. Then, Sarah took a deep breath, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted you to find out, Rachel. But it's too late now. I've been trying to protect you, protect Ethan. But you've gone too far. They're not going to let you walk away from this. No matter what you do, no matter how hard you try to keep digging, it's not going to stop. They won't stop." Rachel's mind reeled.
Who was Sarah talking about?
Who were they? Had Sarah been hiding something from her all along? Was she part of this twisted conspiracy, or was she being forced into it? The questions swirled in her head, each one more frightening than the last. And as Rachel stood there, trying to make sense of it all, a sudden realization hit her. She was being given an ultimatum: leave town, stop looking for answers, and protect her son, or continue this dangerous path and risk everything. It wasn't just her life that was at stake anymore. Ethan's safety, her family's future, everything was hanging in the balance. "I don't know what's going on, but I can't just walk away," Rachel said, her voice trembling with determination. "I can't let them hurt Ethan, or anyone else I care about. I need to know the truth, Sarah. No matter what it takes." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she took a hesitant step forward. "You don't understand, Rachel. You're already in too deep. If you don't stop now, it's not just you who will be hurt. They'll come after everyone you love. This is bigger than anything you've imagined. I never wanted you involved in this, but now you're the only one who can stop it. But you have to choose the truth or your family's safety. The weight of Sarah's words hit Rachel like a freight train. Her mind raced with the impossible choice she now had to make: continue pursuing the truth, risking everything she held dear, or abandon everything she had fought for in the name of safety. She didn't know what was real anymore. She didn't know who she could trust. But one thing was painfully clear: there was no easy way out. Whatever decision she made would change everything, and there would be no going back. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in on her as Rachel grappled with the magnitude of the situation. Could she really walk away? Could she protect Ethan without knowing the truth? Or was it already too late to escape the nightmare she had unknowingly walked into? Just as she opened her mouth to speak, the sound of tires screeching outside broke the silence. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. It was too late. Whoever was out there had found them. And now, the real nightmare was just beginning. The sound of screeching tires outside felt like a punch to Rachel's gut, her body rigid with fear. She instinctively grabbed for her phone, her fingers trembling as she tried to dial the police. But before she could press the call button, a loud, forceful knock echoed from the door. The sound was too urgent, too commanding to be anyone she knew. Her heart skipped a beat, the air thick with a sense of impending danger. There was no time to waste, no time to think it through. Sarah's face went pale, her eyes wide with panic. She stepped back, her hands shaking, and Rachel caught the subtle movement of her shifting toward the window. Rachel's pulse was racing now. She had to act fast. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of disbelief and fear. How had things escalated so quickly? Just days ago, she was leading a normal life, oblivious to the dark forces closing in around her. Now, everything was spiraling out of control. This wasn't just about her, or Ethan anymore. The web of lies, threats, and mysterious players had grown far too large for her to navigate alone. She needed answers, and she needed them now. The knock came again, louder this time. Rachel jumped, adrenaline surging through her body. Without thinking, she ran toward the front door, her hand grasping the handle. But she stopped, frozen in place as something occurred to her. The note, the warning Sarah had given her. This wasn't just a random threat. It was coordinated, precise, and meant to strike fear. Whoever was outside had been tracking her, had known exactly where she'd be. She wasn't just a target anymore. She was a pawn in a much larger game. "Stay down," Sarah whispered urgently, her voice hoarse, panic lacing her every word. "Don't open the door. Whatever you do, don't let them in." But Rachel's instincts kicked in. She wasn't going to cower, not now. She had already lost too much time. "Who's out there, Sarah?" she asked, her voice shaking but resolute. She needed to understand what was happening. Who was behind this? Who was pulling the strings? Sarah's expression flickered, guilt and fear flashing across her face before she quickly looked away. That was when Rachel saw it, the truth hidden in Sarah's eyes. Her friend wasn't just caught in the middle of this.
She was a part of it.
The realization hit Rachel like a freight train, and before she could process it, Sarah spoke, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want you to know, Rachel," she said, her voice trembling. "But I'm not the only one who's been involved. It's bigger than you think. They've been watching us for months, setting everything up, making sure we played our parts. But I can't keep protecting you anymore. It's too late for that." Rachel's stomach dropped as the weight of Sarah's confession slammed into her. You've been part of this all along," she whispered, disbelief curling her words. "But why? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me sooner?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she took a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping with defeat. "I never had a choice," she admitted, her voice breaking. "They've got too many people in too many places. People you wouldn't even suspect. The ones you trust, Rachel, your family, your colleagues, most of them are involved. It's not just about you or Ethan. It's much larger than that. The people pulling the strings, the ones who've been orchestrating all of this, they want something bigger, something that involves all of us." The walls around Rachel seemed to close in, the room spinning as her thoughts raced. Sarah wasn't just a victim. She had been a part of the conspiracy, a pawn like her, and now it felt like there was nowhere to turn. Who could she trust? How deep did this go? The people she thought she knew, the ones she'd loved and leaned on, were all potentially in on this twisted game. She had been walking around in the dark, unaware of the massive scale of the conspiracy, and now the truth was crashing down on her like a tidal wave. "Rachel," Sarah said urgently, her voice almost pleading. "They're coming. They've already made their move. I was supposed to stop you, make you turn back, but it's too late for that now. They'll come for you, for Ethan, for everyone. They won't stop until they've finished what they started." A cold shiver ran down Rachel's spine as she felt the weight of Sarah's words. "What do you mean, finish what they started?" she asked, trying to force some clarity through the fog of fear and confusion.
Who are these people?
What do they want with me? But before Sarah could answer, the door suddenly crashed open with such force that it rattled the frame. A man in a black suit, his face cold and unreadable, stepped inside. His eyes locked onto Rachel's and she froze, instinctively taking a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for the nearest weapon. She had no idea what this man wanted, but she knew one thing for sure. He wasn't here for a friendly chat. The air was thick with tension as the man stepped further into the room, his gaze never wavering from Rachel. "Move," he said in a low, threatening voice, his words sharp and filled with authority. Rachel's heart raced as she felt the room closing in around her. This was it. The moment she had feared. The people behind the conspiracy had found her. And they weren't here for answers. They were here to end this once and for all. But Rachel wasn't going down without a fight. "Get away from me," she spat, her voice trembling but determined. She wasn't about to let this man intimidate her. She wasn't going to let anyone take her son from her, not without a fight. But before the man could react, the sound of a gunshot echoed through the house, and Rachel instinctively ducked, her heart racing. She had no idea where it had come from or who had fired it, but she knew one thing. Things had just escalated to a level she couldn't even begin to comprehend. The man turned, a brief flash of panic crossing his face, and that's when Rachel realized the conspiracy was even bigger than she had thought. This wasn't just about her or Ethan. This was about a network of people, hidden in plain sight, with far-reaching power and control over everything she had once believed was safe. And now, with the gunshot still ringing in her ears, Rachel knew that the only way out of this was to face the truth, no matter how dark, no matter how dangerous it was. She was in the fight of her life, and no one was going to save her but herself. Rachel stood frozen in the middle of the room, her heart pounding as the man in the black suit took a step toward her. The air was thick with tension, every muscle in her body screaming at her to run, but she couldn't move. The gunshot had thrown everything into chaos, and now, with the man advancing toward her, it felt like the walls were closing in. Every step he took felt deliberate, methodical, like he was savoring the moment. But Rachel wasn't about to let him dictate the outcome of this. Not after everything she had been through, not after everything she had learned. "You should have stayed out of this," the man said, his voice low and almost pitying. He didn't seem threatened by her at all. He wasn't even sweating. "But now it's too late. You've seen too much. You've crossed a line that you can never come back from. There's no way out for you, Rachel." His words cut through her, but they didn't break her. She was done with fear. She was done with running. The last few days had turned her life upside down, and now, standing here, facing the truth she had been so desperately avoiding, she knew what she had to do. But there was one thing she needed to understand first. What had been the point of all of this? Why had she been dragged into this tangled web of lies, manipulation, and threats? What was the final piece that would tie everything together? As if reading her thoughts, the man smiled, his cold eyes glinting with a dangerous, knowing gleam. "You're wondering why all of this?
Why you?
Well, let me make it simple for you.
You're the key.
You always have been. The things you've seen, the things you've uncovered, they're not mistakes, Rachel. They were all planned. Every single piece of this was meant to lead you to this point." Rachel's mind was reeling. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words got stuck in her throat. Everything, the mysterious messages, the missing evidence, Sarah's betrayal, had been part of a larger plan all along? She had always thought she was just a pawn in someone's game, but now, the realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just a pawn. She was the target. She had been the one they were waiting for, the one they had been manipulating to set this whole thing in motion. But just as the man took another step toward her, something shifted in Rachel's mind. The truth was there, just beyond her grasp. One final piece, one final question she had yet to ask. With a surge of clarity, she blurted out, "It's about Ethan, isn't it?"
You wanted him.
That's why this whole thing started. He's the key to everything. The man's face betrayed no emotion, but for a brief, fleeting moment, Rachel saw something flicker behind his eyes. Surprise, anger, maybe even fear. "You're smarter than I thought," he said, his voice colder than ever.
Yes.
Ethan is the key. The only one who can unlock the next phase. And you've been playing right into our hands, Rachel. You've been chasing the wrong answers, the wrong clues. But you're here now. And that's all that matters. Rachel's blood ran cold as the full scope of the conspiracy began to unfold in front of her. Ethan wasn't just a pawn, he was the final piece of the puzzle. Everything, Sarah's involvement, the threats, the gunshot, had all been designed to lead Rachel to this exact moment. They had needed her to find the truth, to push her to the edge of the abyss, so they could pull her in and complete their plan. The man's grin widened as he took one last step toward her, his hand reaching into his jacket. Rachel didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, grabbing the closest object she could find, a glass lamp from the table beside her, and swung it with all her strength. The lamp cracked against his head with a sickening thud, and he staggered back, momentarily stunned. This was her chance. But before she could move, the room seemed to explode in chaos. The door flew open again, and two more figures in black suits stormed in, blocking her escape. She was trapped. She could feel the heat of panic rising in her chest, her mind racing for a way out, but every exit was cut off. The man she had just struck with the lamp was recovering, his eyes locking onto her with murderous intent. "Good job," he sneered, wiping the blood from his forehead. "You fought well, but now it's over." As he took a step toward her, Rachel's mind raced, looking for an opening, anything that could give her an edge. That's when she saw it. A small, inconspicuous notebook on the floor near the door, one she hadn't noticed before. She recognized it instantly. It was the notebook Sarah had been carrying the night she first warned Rachel. With adrenaline coursing through her veins, Rachel dove for it, snatching it up and flipping it open. The pages were filled with strange symbols, complex diagrams, and cryptic notes. But one word caught her eye: Ethan. Underneath, it was a series of coordinates. They weren't random. They were the exact locations where Rachel and Ethan had been. Every step they had taken, every move they had made, all meticulously mapped out. This wasn't just about Ethan. It was about control over every aspect of their lives, their movements, their decisions. And now, with this notebook, Rachel held the key to breaking it all wide open. The man lunged at her, but Rachel was ready. She kicked out, knocking him off balance, and in that split second of chaos, she bolted for the door. She could hear him yelling behind her, the sound of pursuit growing louder as she raced down the hallway. The notebook was in her hands, but she had no idea what it would lead to, or if she'd even be alive long enough to figure it out. But in that moment, she understood one thing. The truth had always been just out of reach, hidden in plain sight. And now, with this notebook, Rachel had the power to expose everything, to bring the truth to light, no matter what the cost. And just when she thought she had escaped, a voice rang out from behind her. "You think you can run from this? It's already too late." Rachel's heart skipped a beat as she realized the truth had only just begun to unfold, and the game was far from over. Rachel sat quietly in the small, dimly lit room, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her chest like a heavy stone. The final confrontation had been chaotic, violent, and overwhelming. She had exposed the conspiracy, confronted the people who had manipulated her, and survived long enough to bring everything into the light. The authorities were now in control, investigating the network of corruption that had ensnared her and so many others for so long. The dangerous figures who had once threatened her were being arrested, their carefully crafted empire of lies unraveling before the world. But none of it felt like a victory. It was as though the truth, once revealed, had taken something precious from her, something she couldn't get back. The peace she had hoped for felt distant, unattainable, like a dream fading as soon as she woke up. Her mind kept returning to the notebook, the final clue that had led her to this moment. The cryptic notes, the coordinates, and the diagrams hadn't just pointed to Ethan, they had pointed to something bigger. The conspiracy, the manipulation, the threats, they had all been pieces of a far-reaching puzzle, one she had only begun to understand. Ethan was safe now, hidden away, far from the people who had tried to control his every move. She had protected him, at least for now. But even in the safety of his new life, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over. The people involved were too powerful, too elusive. She knew, deep down, that the forces behind the conspiracy hadn't just disappeared. There were whispers, rumors about others who were still out there, still watching. Rachel's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock on the door. It was a soft, tentative knock, one that seemed out of place after everything she had been through. When she opened it, she found an envelope, simple and unmarked, resting on the doorstep. Her heart skipped a beat as she bent down and picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly as she tore it open. Inside, there was just one line written in neat handwriting. "You've only scratched the surface." It hit her like a punch to the gut. The feeling of being watched, of being trapped in a game she couldn't fully comprehend, it was back. This wasn't over. No, the truth had only been one layer of a much deeper, darker mystery. She had been given just enough to think she had won, just enough to believe that she had escaped. But the reality was much more complex than she could have ever imagined. Rachel sank back against the doorframe, the weight of the envelope in her hand now heavier than it had been before. She thought about Ethan, about Sarah, about everything she had lost in this journey. But there was no time to dwell on it. She had uncovered a vast network of lies and deception, but now she had to find out who was really behind it all, and why they had gone to such lengths to keep their secrets hidden. The world outside her door was quieter now. The threats had slowed, the danger had passed for the moment. But as Rachel stared at the envelope, her mind racing with new questions, she couldn't help but wonder what was waiting for her next. The mystery had only deepened, the stakes higher than ever before. The last few days had changed everything. And though she had found moments of peace, the realization settled in her gut like a stone. Some stories never truly end. Some mysteries never truly get solved. The web of lies, the people who manipulated her, they were still out there, watching. And Rachel knew, in the pit of her stomach, that she would never truly be free. The truth she had uncovered had set her on a path, one that would lead her to a future filled with questions and uncertainty. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever came next, she was ready. Because now, she understood that the fight for truth, no matter how difficult or painful, was one that would never truly end. It would always linger, just beneath the surface, a part of her story. And no matter what, she couldn't turn away from it. As the door slowly clicked shut behind her, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was still watching, waiting for her next move. The silence that filled the room was deafening, but she didn't feel alone. Something in the air had shifted, something that told her the world she had known would never be the same again. And with that, she stepped into the unknown, her future uncertain, her mind racing with possibilities. The mystery, the danger, the truth, it was all still out there. And it wasn't over. Not by a long shot.